O'Reilly! You need parts? O'Reilly Auto Parts has parts. Need them fast? We've got fast. No matter what you need, we have thousands of professional parts people doing their part to make sure you have it. Product availability. Just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people. O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Welcome back to the show, my friends. I am your host, Eric Szilagyi. If you've had an uncomfortable experience and you'd like to have it shared here on the show, please get a hold of me at contact.uncomfortable@gmail.com. The world wants to hear your story. It wants to hear your experience. So reach out to me and let's get yours on the next episode of Uncomfortable. If you haven't yet, make sure to like us on Facebook and Instagram, both at Uncomfortable Podcast 65. And once you get a chance to listen and view a couple of the episodes, please make sure to leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you can. That alone is the one most important thing that you can do as a listener to help get this show into the algorithms and out in front of more people. And with more people listening, you guessed it, more good stories coming your way. If video is more of your thing, then make sure to subscribe to Uncomfortable Podcast on YouTube, where you can get the video version of most shows. If that's where you like to listen to us, make sure to click like and subscribe, and I believe even the little notification bell, so you're notified every time a new release comes out. Take a minute and check out the Uncomfortable link tree, as it's the single best place that you can find anything and everything uncomfortable all in one spot. The link for that is in the show description, in the show notes in the description below. I got a great show for you tonight. This gentleman that's going to be our guest tonight was suggested by a good friend of the show. And it kind of goes in line with a couple of weeks ago, if you remember my release of my take on the Ape Canyon. We have the man himself. This guy is supposedly, and I have no doubts that he is the foremost authority on the Ape Canyon event. So, if you're ready, let's get into it. If you would, please give a warm, uncomfortable welcome to Mr. Marc Myrsell. Marc, welcome to Uncomfortable.
Right on, Eric. Thanks so much for inviting me. I checked out your previous podcast 2 or 3 weeks ago, and you laid it down pretty well about the whole bones of the Ape Canyon incident of 1924, and really, it's one of those Bigfoot classics. And
it really is. It really is.
Yeah, when we were kids, and if you were interested in the unexplained, no matter what it was, Bigfoot or UFOs or Atlantis, everybody heard about the Ape Canyon incident, particularly where I am. I'm coming to you from the Pacific Northwest right now in Olympia, Washington.
Really?
Everybody around here in Southwest Washington, because that's where it all happened, just 100 miles from me up on Mount.
You're in the Olympias.
Everybody knew about it. Yeah. So it was sort of a midlife crisis, maybe about 15, 17 years ago. And I started researching it. And as if I had never heard about it before. I remember hearing about it when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And about 15, 17 years ago, I got back into it, and I just found this huge dearth of information, newspaper document evidence that had really never been brought to light before. And I just became obsessed with it and have been working on it ever since.
Fantastic. That's awesome. So I got it right, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
I got it right.
Good. Yeah.
Right.
We can go over we can nitpick some details, but yeah, we can talk about it.
Well, I did notice, like, as I reread my script, there was some cloudiness in a couple of the different texts and resources that I was pulling from, as far as whether it was the main character who actually fired the first shot, or if it was somebody who was accompanying him on the way to the well to get, or on the way to the water source. And who that was the only part that I was like, I'm gonna leave it in there because I wasn't sure who did what. So
Yeah. You know, the way that almost everybody, and probably you, uh, got a hold of the Ape Canyon story, it's basically from two sources. My first source, when I was like 6 or 7 years old, was this great dramatization that was part of the film by Ron Olson called Sasquatch Legend of Bigfoot. I
yes,
believe it came out 75 or 76,
yep,
and that's where I first saw it on the Late Show. And it up until here in about 3 weeks, I got to say it was one of the best storytellings of the Ape Canyon incident. The other source material that most people first get a hold of the story is the book I Fought the Ape Men of Mount St. Helens. That came out in
right,
67 or 68, written by Fred Beck and
yep,
his son Ronald Arnie Beck. And when you read that book, it's basically divided into two parts. The first part is a basic retelling of the events. The
hmm,
second part that Fred gets a lot of bad press on is that in the second part it goes on and on and on about Fred's opinions of how we fit into cosmology, how Bigfoot fits into cosmology, and he philosophizes is the best word
right.
for it, I guess. But in when you review that first part of the book, and then you go back and look at the document evidence that I have pulled, the what Fred talked about is basically true. He gives some of the basic facts, and what I'm talking about is that directly after the 1924 attack, word got out, and actually the first newspaper article was published only 2 days after the attack. It was published on July the 12th, 1924. We had the Associated Press wire at that point, and so it spread on all newspapers all over the West. I found the story was covered at the time as far east as Missouri, north to BC, and I think I found a copy down in San Diego. So the word spread like wildfire. The good
Can I
thing
can I
is,
can I can I
go ahead.
jump in here real quick
Yeah,
with as much as and Beck even kind of drew attention to the fact that the story moved really rapidly.
it did.
So, like, were you able to find like copies of the actual articles?
Yeah, yeah.
So, I guess what I'm really interested in is how were they written? Were they written to be sensationalized? Were they or were they written as hey, this is what this guy's saying happened, and this is an account, or was there some sensationalism to the way they were written?
The the thing that helps us out the most is that when word got out, there were about 5 or 6 newspaper reporters that some of them actually bothered to go up a week after the attack and review the site. They went down to the cabin and they reviewed the mine, and some of them actually took the trouble to interview the miners. There were 5 miners at the time on Thursday, July the 10th, and some were interviewed at length, some were interviewed just briefly. But
Hmm.
that gave us a really, really good storyline, a really good contemporary storyline of what had happened the week before. The way that the articles came out, I got to tell you, for the most part, it was just the facts, ma'am. It was just, I got to
Really?
say, sensationalized. No. The only thing that could have been qualified as sensationalism was that, you and I, think of ourselves in the year 2025 as being so erudite and so sophisticated, and we think of our ancestors, the people that came before us, as bumpkins who believed in
Troglodytes.
the superstition, right? And
Right.
but what was quite amazing is that when these stories came out in the papers, how quickly they came up with explain it away theories. They were drunk, they were boozing, and they were seeing
Yeah.
things, and they were spiritualists. They were doing Ouija board or seances or whatever.
Really? They pulled
But
that into it?
yeah, they did. Yeah, and I
Wow.
mean, my old joke that I tell people is, I like to drink beer and wine, and I've messed around with a Ouija board, but at no point have I ever thought that my house was being attacked by a band of 7 foot tall monsters. Right.
Right.
So each one of the miners was interviewed, and they said, no, we weren't drinking, and no, we're not spiritualists, and this is what happened. And there were rumors through my years of working on this project of a deathbed confession of at some point there was a miner that said that we hoaxed the whole thing, and I never found
Really?
any evidence. I've never found any evidence of that at all. And they all went to their deathbeds, all went to their graves, never recanting the story. They said this is what happened.
So the one that said we all hoaxed it, he was one of the original five, or he was an additional minor?
Oh
Uh,
no,
uh,
no, 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 no! All of them, all of them said we did not hoax it at all.
okay.
Each one of them said no, this is it. The most interesting one I found, who was not interviewed hardly at all, was the youngest of the crew. It was Leroy Perry Smith. He was the one who went to the spring and came back to the cabin. It was only about 75 feet away. Came back to the cabin, and this big bruiser, this big individual creature is coming out of the brush at him during the daytime before the big attack.
Hmm.
Leroy said in his interview, he said, I don't know what that was that came out of the brush, and I fired shots into it. But I got to tell you, I never, ever want to have anything to do with that thing ever again. And it was true. He went to his grave with hardly ever talking about it again. I have been
Really?
able to track down and became friends and have interviewed his daughter, Betty Mitchell, who is still alive. And she grew up in Kelso Longview, where the miners were lived, and they're sort of their headquarters. And she knew about the Ape Canyon attack, but she didn't know it was her dad and her uncle and her grandfather
Oh,
until
really?
I told her. Her
Wow.
dad never said a single word to her about it at all. So
Interesting.
yeah, yeah, something sure scared them.
Yeah.
They had another good maybe 4 or 5 months worth of good weather where they could stay up there and still work the mine. Allegedly, they were getting good assays. They were getting gold out of the mine. I'm actually trying to track down the assay record on the mine itself right now. So they had good weather, but we know from the document record where they had to file a proof of labor to maintain their claim, and they filed a proof of labor that year in 1924. We moved this much ore. We got so much gold, and all work in that document that was filed in 1924. All work was completed on July the 10th, 1924. It says that in the proof of labor, July the 10th, 1924 was the night of the attack. And they were saying, we're done and we're never going back. And they never did.
Did did they was it true that they relinquished any rights to the property,
Yeah,
or
they
to
basically
that claim?
They basically did. Now, here in Washington and Oregon at the time, it was the issue is sort of like a donation land claim, where a land or with mineral rights, you have to lay claim to it, and then you have to work the mine for a statutory period of time. I believe in 1924 it was 3 years or 5 years, and so they had only worked the mine for 2 years at that point. They laid claim in 1922, and then by that proof of labor stating that all work was completed on July the 10th, 1924, they were ad hoc in a way. giving up their claim. And at
Yeah.
that point, they never worked the mine again and never filed a proof of labor. So any mineral rights that they could have had just all disappeared. They're all gone. Right
Yeah.
now, the property was in a national forest at the time, the Columbia National Forest, and now it's in the Mount St. Helens Volcanic Monument, and you can't do anything. You can't. There are no mineral. You can no mining, no nothing. So the mine is there. The mine was found last year, but there it is. There could be gold in it, but you can't dig it.
Yeah. Without going into the story of it, because the people listening to this are going to have already heard it, just a couple of weeks ago, and on top of that, probably the majority of those people have already heard the story
Sure,
countless times.
sure.
What are the more deep-seated aspects that you've uncovered over the years that would
Well,
impact this story even more?
Um, the my background is I'm a private land surveyor. My dad was a land surveyor, and I've been surveying all my life, and I'm still doing it. The thing about if I can bore you for a minute, the nature of land surveying is that, Eric, you call me and say, I need to know where my property corners are. The
Right.
first thing that I do is a tremendous amount of document research because I need to find out what previous surveyors have done, or at least what they said that they did, what
Yeah.
previous landowners have done. I need to know what kind of groundwork has been done before. And then the next one is I have to go out and collect field evidence out in the field, compare that information with the document evidence. So I'm comparing apples and oranges and coming to some sort of conclusion. And so with the way that you and I grew up, in the early 70s. I was always fascinated with the unexplained mysteries of life,
Mm.
Bigfoot and everything, UFOs. And so I
Yeah.
found that my skills as land surveying, believe it or not, directly applied to my interest in historical stories of high strangeness, particularly if I think that there could be some sort of physical aspect to these old stories that could still exist. And
Hmm.
so the issue of Bigfoot today, is the Bigfoot phenomenon real? Absolutely, yes, it's real. What it is, I don't know exactly. Yeah, I'm more likely in the camp of a flesh and blood North American wood ape kind of thing. But there are other people who have like issues of like interdimensional beings and,
Hmm. Yeah.
portal and all that kind of jazz, which
Sure.
there's not that much evidence of that. So I really don't go down that rabbit hole.
But you bring that up. But what I find really fascinating is in the book that Beck wrote. Once you get past the initial recounting of the story of that day and night, as you were saying, that book kind of drolls on philosophically.
Sure.
But there's some significant correlations to what's said in that book that lines up with and I hate the term, I wish they'd come up with something new, but the woo aspects of Bigfoot, there were some things that were like, oh shit, he
Yeah.
was talking about this back then,
Sure.
you
That
know?
that that part of the book I find incredibly fascinating, and I
Hmm.
feel like Fred Beck in I'm going to explain what I'm trying to say. Fred Beck in writing that really got a bad rap, where he was philosophizing about it, and then people are taking that as woo. I agree with you. I don't like
Right.
that term either. But what they
Yeah,
were doing is because of what Fred wrote in the second part, they were throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If they
exactly.
don't
And you
like
can't
that
do that.
aspect, they're throwing everything away, right? The
Hmm.
fascinating thing about Fred, um, at one point in the interviews in 1924, he and his father-in-law, Marion Smith, who is really the patriarch of the whole Ape Canyon project, they were asked, are you guys spiritualists? Were you doing seances up there? And they were like, no, we're not spiritualists. It was the time in 1920s where people were doing
Sure.
seances much more commonplace than perhaps
Right. Yeah.
today.
That was a big thing back then.
But the fascinating thing is that later on in life, as an older man on his property, on his house off of Allen Street in Kelso, he did become a spiritualist. He did become a faith healer, where he was conducting seances in his house and doing faith
Really?
healing. Betty, again, Leroy's daughter, attended one and witnessed her dad being healed by Fred Beck. And Fred claimed that he was, having levitations of chairs and ectoplasm and all the kind of classic seance kind of thing.
Yeah.
The other thing is that Fred was just a logger, mill worker, hardworking guy, union man all of his life. He may have been Lutheran, but he was just like a regular, hardworking guy. But I found it fascinating that he pursued that avocation later in life of spiritual healing and doing seances and stuff at the time in the early 1960s, right? Even before the late 60s, even before that kind of became in vogue,
Right. The hippie movement and all that.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. So I find that part really fascinating. Ronald, his son, was now I tried to track down Ronald, his son, who co-authored the book with him. I missed Ronald by literally 3 or 4 weeks after Ronald had died. But fortunately, my friend John Pickering, who's a great Bigfoot researcher, he had interviewed Ronald Beck in the rest home. And Ronald felt that his dad was sort of like an Edgar Casey kind of character, somewhat
Yeah.
of a clairvoyant, that Fred had the ability to see things that the rest of us don't, have a greater understanding of, if you will, the cosmos and how truly existence really works. And so when you read that book and you take a look at the very few audio and video recordings of Fred Beck regarding Ape Canyon, and comparing the writing in the book and comparing the interviews that Fred did, you can tell that that second part of the book was more Ronald's voice. I believe it was his son who was promulgating a lot of this, even though Fred was definitely on board with it.
Yeah.
But it was more Ronald, his son, who was uh,
Interesting.
explaining what his dad did and what his dad knew, and explaining his dad's abilities.
Yeah.
But yeah, he definitely was a forerunner. Where I have great friends in the Bigfoot research community, yes, who are definitely in the camp of interdimensional beings and portals and being able to communicate either with mind speak or
Mhm.
leaving glyphs out in the woods with sticks and leaves and stuff in different arrangements, and then getting some sort of response back from these big hair covered creatures out in the woods. And so again, I don't like the word woo, and I may not agree with everything that they believe,
Mhm.
witnesses or researchers, but I can't discount what they have to say, because I believe 99% of the time when someone says that they saw something in the woods, they saw something in the woods.
Right.
What it is, I don't know. But if they,
Well, I
believe
just
whatever they believe, I have to take that into account.
yeah. I just had several great conversations with researcher Todd Neese,
Sure.
who was from out in Oregon, uh, recently moved to Arkansas,
To Arkansas, yeah. Todd,
and
Todd and I, Todd and I are good friends. He was one of the earliest supporters when nobody knew me, and he invited
yeah,
me to his conference out at Beachwood. That was my first conference
yeah,
I
yeah,
attended.
yeah. He actually extended me a invitation to that this year, which I was pretty floored because that's limited to 100 people and by invitation only. So I was honored by that. But
Eric,
you know,
are you going?
I don't know that I can.
I don't know if I can either. It's on the 4th of July. I was
I
like,
know
Todd, why do you have it on the 4th of July? But
my girlfriend's birthday is the 4th of July, and
geez,
you know she supports me in what I do here, but not sure that I want to take her birthday and turn it into a Bigfoot weekend, and it would be a hell of a long drive, and I'll be damned if I'm getting on a fucking plane
yes.
anytime soon with the way things have been going.
Tell me about it. I have a very similar relationship with my wife and my family, and she supports me greatly. And well, of course, I love her. She's the best person in the world, but she is also somewhat of a skeptic as well, which is good because she really questions my stuff as
Yeah.
she should, you know. But yeah, I can't push it too hard. So I understand.
Well, you know, it's interesting because, you know, my girlfriend knows of this stuff. You know, but she's not like dove into all of it, you know. I mean, most of what she's heard has been from going and listening to my shows.
Okay.
Right. So, you know, whether I'm right or wrong, that's where she's getting her information. But you know, it was a grand gesture on his part, and I would love to be able to say yes, but I just don't know that. I don't know that it's in the cards.
Yeah, I hear you.
But I guess what I was before we got sidetracked on that, what I was going to say is, you know, like people when they have these experiences, you know, according to Todd in his account, he guesstimates that he witnessed these three beings for a period of maybe 20 to 25 seconds.
Right.
And that changed the course of his life.
Yeah.
Not immediately, but ultimately, within a couple of years, he had transitioned into that being. I gotta figure this out. I gotta find out what it was. I need to talk to people who've seen the same thing. You know, and 40 years. That's an impactful thing. When you see something for, you know, and his was a prolonged experience. Most reports are much more fleeting than that.
Oh, absolutely.
But nonetheless, no less impactful. I mean, it changes the history of how those people view things and their interests. And I hate to use the word obsessed, but you know, some people become drawn to research and, if nothing else, becoming, you know, enthusiasts about the topic.
You know, I my friend Shane Corson, and he's with the Olympic Project up here. He
I've
taught
got
me
an
the
interview
term.
with him next week.
Oh, with Shane? Okay, great.
I
Well,
do.
yeah, okay, that's good because Shane is one of the best people in the world, and actually, he is an Ape Canyon veteran. He's been up there with me twice.
Has he?
Great guy. Shane taught me the term confirmation experience, and with Bigfoot, or probably with any other subject, but a confirmation experience is where you see that right in front of you, and you may not have a word for it, and you may not understand what you're seeing, but there's no denying what you saw,
Yeah.
right? And so, up until about 2 years ago, getting involved with the research community and talking to people about Bigfoot and talking to people about Ape Canyon, people would come to me, especially at conferences or whatever, and they would want to share their story. You know, a story that could have happened 25 years ago when they were
Yeah.
14 years old or whatever. But one fellow told me he was just looking for a safe space and a safe, friendly ear to hear his story, right? And so I up until a couple of years ago, I certainly listened to all their stories and asked questions when I felt it was, warranted to ask a question. But I kind of got the impression hearing these stories, and I'm not trying to discredit the term I'm about to use, but it almost seems to be a PTSD kind of phenomenon where these witnesses encounter something that is so that really twigs your brain. It's something that you have
Yeah.
never ever seen before, and after that, it's like PTSD. It's like looping in your head over and over and over again, and you have to do something about it. Pursue
Hmm.
research, go to therapy or something because it's there. On another project, another historic monster attack project down in Southwest Oregon, of a series of attacks and different stuff that happened over the period of actually 30 years. I was down there again, like Ape Canyon, looking for physical evidence of gold mining activity in a cabin that was attacked twice in 1 week, and driving out way out in the national forest, out in the middle of nowhere. I had the weirdest 5 or 6 seconds of my life where at 200 feet in front of me, crossing the road, were two individuals that just
Really?
bolted. And it was about 5 or 6 seconds of my life. I was driving. And when I first saw the first individual enter the road, I was about 200 feet away or so, slowed the car, kept up on him. By the time the second individual bolted up the hill into the woods, I was nearly right on top of him. And all I can say is I know what I saw. And my Bigfoot research friends say, "You don't think you saw Sasquatch?" And I explained to them what I saw, and they're like, "You saw two Sasquatch individuals." And I'm like, "I don't know, because frankly, I'm not even sure what Sasquatch is, but I know what I saw." And again, dealing with other family members who may not have delved into the subject as much as we have.
Yeah.
My sweetheart, my wife says, well, the only other explanation besides Sasquatch is that someone is raising and releasing orangutans into the national forest down in
Not
Southwest
likely.
Oregon.
Not
No,
likely.
really unlikely. But yeah,
Interesting. So
it,
now
it,
that
it really took your
you
brain.
now you've brought it up, so I got to ask. I got to do what I do. What did you see?
Oh, so here I'm going to give you one historical aspect about the Thompson Flat monster. My term for the project is the Thompson Flat monster, and it happened at Thompson Flat down in Curry County, Oregon, about 20 miles from the ocean, about 60 miles north of the California border. Historically, starting around 1873 and going into the teens of the early 20th century, there were a whole series of encounters up there. A lot of them not that friendly. It was not just a road crossing. These were aggressive individuals, tall, bipedal, covered with hair. No hair on their face or their hands, and camps were being torn apart, dogs were being killed, taking shots into it, just like Ape Canyon, seemingly to no effect. At one point, over the period of about 18 months, four miners were found dead individually with their bodies beaten to a pulp or their heads bashed in.
Oh
Completely
my.
unexplained deaths. Oddly enough, those miners are buried up there in the national forest, and we were able to track down their burial plots up there and their cabins and their gold mining activity and everything.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about this is that very, very consistently, the individual creatures were described as maybe 6 to 7 feet tall, covered entirely with hair, and the characteristic was it was a dirty blonde, yellowish hair. Each and all of these historical reports, and again, there were newspaper articles written and people interviewed at the time of these individual encounters. So it was about 5:30. It was within November, so it's about 5 or 5:30 in the afternoon. And this is a lot of this area is old growth forest because the terrain is just simply was simply too steep for it to be logged. So going down this Forest Service road that is pretty dinky. It's good enough for maybe a vehicle and a half, going through the tall trees. And again, this is very steep terrain where you have a steep bank coming up from the river, a road cut, and then it keeps on going up very, very steeply.
Gotcha.
I'm rounding around the curve, and I have my headlights on, and I drive. I've always driven like a old lady, 25 saves lives. I drive really slow anyway, and so I have my lights on. I may have had my brights on the car. I
So
round
it's
around the
nighttime.
curve. Yeah, yeah.
It's nighttime?
It's fall in November, so it's dark. And coming up from the river through the brush onto the road, I startled it. I spooked it. I don't think it saw or heard me coming, but about 200 feet in front of me, there was an individual in the middle of the road, and I could see it moving. But as soon as my lights hit it, it dead stopped, and it faced me about 200 feet away. And my first thought was, who the hell is playing in the middle of the national forest at night? And why are they wearing a fireman's outfit? Because it was big, bulky arms. It looked like a firefighter's outfit, big, bulky arms, big,
Light
bulky
tan?
legs. Sorry?
Light tan in color too?
Yeah. And that was it, like a fireman's outfit. It was
Yeah.
dark, beige, dirty yellow, right? And
Wow.
as if the fireman has a big, huge collar. There was no neck or anything, and I immediately took my foot off the accelerator a little bit, but continued on maybe 15, 20 miles an hour. And it started to cross the road, but just before it keeps on crossing the road, it turns and looks where it had come from. And then a second individual comes from a crouching position, standing up at the road, and the two of them just start cooking it across the road. And what was one of the most disturbing things is that it was something that I had never seen before. And then secondly, it was their movement. The paradigm that you and I live with is, what does Sasquatch look like? How does
Yeah.
Sasquatch move? We have in our brains Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin's film of the PG
Yeah.
film. And Sasquatch walks in these long, loping, nice, easy strides and swinging arms and that kind of thing. No, these guys were in a runner's fashion with their arms bent like they were jogging, but their movements were lightning quick and jerky. And the best way I can describe it is like watching a dragonfly or an insect take off, or
Yeah.
very, very young people in a game of chase at the playground. It was fast, quick, quick, quick. And their heads were down, looking down at the ground at their feet. They didn't want to look at me. And bam, they got to the other side of the road, and just flew up the side of this cliff, a side of a hillside. Well, by the time the second individual exited the road, I was within about 50 feet or so, and I almost kept going. I was very wigged out. My heart was racing, and I almost kept going, but I slammed on the brakes, put it in park, stood up, and I looked to where these two individuals had left the road. And the thing that got me the worst is that all I heard was the South Fork of the Sixes River running below me, 200 or 300 feet away. I didn't hear any brush breaking. I didn't hear any crutching. And I assumed by the rate of speed that they were maybe 75 feet, 100 feet up the hill from me. I didn't hear anything.
Yeah.
And what got me in my fight or flight brain was that whatever I saw crossing the road was now up there, standing there, watching me.
Watching you. Yeah.
And then suddenly all this heat started coming up the back of my neck, and the hair started, going up high on me. And it was freaky. I had been up there.
Do you think that feeling that you had was just the realization of, holy shit, I just saw something that shouldn't be? Or do you think that was, do you think that it's possible that could have been kind of a side effect to what so many people refer to as being zapped or, having their, being influenced by being around these creatures?
One of the most common things, I'm going to just do a sidebar here for a second. One of the most common
Sure.
things that people talk about, which mainstream science is mainstream science, and there are a lot lot with mainstream science and how research is funded and
Right.
conducted. And I'm going to talk briefly about infrasound. Infrasound is, there are some people in the mainstream research community, science community, it's like, that's nonsense and it's never been proven. I completely disagree.
Right. Of
Infrasound
course.
is a known phenomenon. Elephants,
And there's
lions, sharks.
animals in our natural world that exhibit and use that to stop their prey.
To stun. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And yeah, exactly. So it's a real phenomenon. And of course, the idea is that infrasound is not audible to our everyday ears.
Mhm.
So whether it was that phenomenon with me and other people, because that was my only, I've heard some very strange things in the woods that I can't explain. I've seen tracks, fortunately one that we were able to cast up on the mountain, but I never had that confirmation experience. So for me personally, about what happened to me, again, I don't know. By my 20th encounter, by the time I'm dead, maybe I'll be able to have more comparative, compare the experiences. But that was
Yeah.
my only one. Number one, it was something that I had never seen before. And also the movements. The movements were like nothing I saw before. They were upright, bipedal, walking like a person, running like a person, but they weren't shaped like a person. And the way that they moved certainly was not like any person I've ever seen move on video or live. It was just plain disturbing. It was plain disturbing. It was disturbing to the point where I got back to the reception area where my phone would work, and I'm like 6 or 7 hours drive from my family. We're going to stay in a hotel room because we have some more research to do, document research to do. And I got to the hotel room, and the first thing that everybody should do is I got my notebook and a pencil and I started sketching out what I had just seen 3 or 4 hours previously. I called into my family, and I was on speakerphone with my wife and one of my sons, and I couldn't tell them. I just couldn't tell them. But 2 or 3 or 4 days later, got back home, and I was like, honey, I saw something in the woods. Something happened in the woods. I saw something, and told her about it. And Thanksgiving was about a week later, so friends and I called Shane, talked to other people in the Bigfoot research community, and the oddest phenomenon for me, the first dozen times telling people this story, is I couldn't get through the story without tears coming down my face, and I don't know why. I didn't feel in danger. I didn't feel unsafe. I really didn't feel threatened.
Yeah.
But in talking about what happened, it was just that disturbing. Where even right now, Eric, I choke up a little bit
Yeah.
because I don't want to say flashbacks. I'm not a combat veteran, and I don't know, but it almost is like a PTSD where those images keep coming
Yeah.
back, and you never shake it. You never forget every single detail.
There's nothing to reconcile it with.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because you don't have that apple to compare it with the orange that you just
Right.
saw. You don't have that. You have a round peg, and you just have a bunch of square holes. So
Let,
what do I do with this? Where do I put it?
let me take you back to something you said. You said they were bipedal, they were upright, they were running like people, but they didn't look like people.
Right.
Is that a commentary on Just the fact that they were hair covered, or was that a commentary on build, the way they were shaped?
I mean, setting aside people who like work out and use too many bodybuilding, muscle building kind of thing,
Steroids.
setting that aside, right? Yeah, setting that aside. Yeah, it's the bulk. And okay, here I got to tell you one thing. I was up there with a couple of other researchers, and we went into town. But we went back the next morning. We went up the slope to look for tracks, and we found a few impressions, nothing castable. But one thing that we did is that one person stood. I knew exactly where they crossed the road. So we had one person stand up there, and my other friend went with me in the car, and we recreated my driving route to be able to tell how big these things were. And the best that we can tell is that the first individual was about 6.5 feet tall. The second was a little bit shorter, maybe 6 feet tall. But it was there definitely was the bulk there. It was massive, massive legs, and massive, massive shoulders and arms. That was one. The other thing is that I got a better look at the second individual because I was a lot closer,
Mhm.
and it was, and I don't know, 50 feet away, and it was looking down where I was able to clearly see the side of its face, and it was the best way I could tell is that it was not like a black Newfoundland dog in hair length. It was more like I don't know, a greyhound, if you will. It was short, nappy hair,
Really?
and it was very, very short, but it was definitely hair covered, except in the face. And in the face, it was heavy brow. The hair came down to just above its brow. It was a heavy, heavy brow, and a very, very short, flattened nose, and a little bit more of a muzzle than, say, humans have. A little bit more of a protrusion around the
Yeah.
proboscis mouth area. Heavy lips. I remember heavy, heavy, heavy lips. And in the running, I remember that it was hair covered down along the arm, down to maybe the top of the hand, but the fingers were a little bit more fleshy. And it
Yeah.
was, say, sort of a beigeish kind of skin color.
Skin tone. The
Yeah,
face was the same.
yeah, the face was the same. Yeah, 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 a little,
Interesting. It's interesting that you say the full lips, because in so many encounters when people recount it, oftentimes you hear people talk about just how thin their lips were. That
sure.
the mouths are very wide, but
Yeah,
very thin lipped.
yeah. It was. I would agree with that. And from this side view, yeah, you could see more the side of the mouth along, headed towards the back of the head. It was more than just a
Mm.
regular human, and the lips were thin. It was just that they were protruding more. You
Oh, I
know,
got you. I got you. They extended out past the face
yeah,
more.
the front of the face or the front of that short little muzzle. And we're
Yeah.
not talking like a muzzle like a horse or anything like that. It was just a
Yeah.
little bit more than what we have. And the issue with the lips is interesting because in observing ape, and particularly ape, sometimes monkey, and also other reports of Sasquatch encounters. There are so many reports where you and I, our main tools are our hands and our fingers and our feet
Yeah.
to a degree, but there are so many reports from Bigfoot and the apes that we do know of the lips being a tool too,
Yeah.
where they're able to use the lips better than we use our lips for, say.
Yeah, they're able to manipulate it to pull the leaves off of
Sure.
limbs and stuff like that. Yeah, I know exactly what you're getting at.
Sure. There was a great report, and I didn't take the report. It's a well-known report where a Sasquatch-like creature was seen taking evergreen, I think it was Douglas fir, limbs off a tree, and it was in springtime, mid-springtime, and it was using its lips to take the nice, fresh green growth off of it and pluck it and eat it that way.
Interesting.
It wasn't chewing; it was using its lips to
Yeah.
pluck it off.
It's funny because, excuse me, just not too long ago, and I guess we'll give Small Town Monsters a plug here because you've got something coming up very quickly in the near future with them. I was watching one of their older documentaries, and they were with people from the Olympic Project, and they were in the area where the nests were found and eventually deconstructed.
Yeah,
And they were talking about, I believe they were the huckleberry leaves
right.
that were, and they said plucked from
Yeah,
the branches, and there were piles of them around, kind of creating a clear line of sight from the larger nest to the smaller nest, which they
yeah,
assumed were probably for juveniles. But that point that you bring up about the articulation or the ability to manipulate with their leaves, I almost wonder if more than plucking them off with their hand, if they're actually grabbing hold of the branch and plucking them off with their lips.
well, I will talk about small town monsters in a second, but since you have our great pal Shane Corson, who is
Hmm.
one of the core group of the Olympic
Right.
Project and one of the core group of the nest site, Shane can describe it better than I can. But they definitely were able to track down. Oh, at first, there was a timber cruiser that brought this information to Shane and Derek Randalls at the Olympic Project. I found this thing. You guys got to check it out. And that's where kind of like the first discovery of a nest site was, as far as the
Yeah.
research community goes. So they kept on finding other nest sites around. But Shane was explaining to me where they were able to find nearby huckleberry bushes where they could see that break. They could see that break. There was a definitive break of that thing taken and then taken over here a few feet to build that nest.
Yeah.
One of the fascinating things about the nests that I've discussed with OP nest site friend. I'm a member of the Olympic Project, so I kind of know everybody there. One
You
of the
know
things that
Amy
we,
Boo?
huh?
You know Amy Boo?
Oh, well, yeah. Oh, Amy and I are good friends. Yeah,
Yeah,
Amy's
what
cool.
a lovely soul. She's
A-
wonderful to talk to.
Amy's wonderful. Actually, David Ellis, the sound analysis guy at the LP, he invited me and Amy to the Olympic Project on the same week. And so I
Oh,
called
really?
Amy. I was like, "Are you going to do it?" And she's like, "Are you going to do it?" So that's how we came part of the Olympic Project. But we were sort of just chatting. Late night getting together. And I think it was Chris Spencer and maybe Todd Hale. But one of the fascinating things is that Huckleberry in our area and traditionally with humans is that huckleberry is
It's
associated with
medicinally, right?
yeah,
Medicinally for labor pains, isn't it?
exactly, that's what I was about to bring up. It is a
Sorry,
birth
I
plant.
didn't mean to jump
No,
in,
no,
but
no.
when I know something, I'm like, I know what this is.
Raise your hand, Eric. No, it is. Yeah, it is. It is. It's part of the birth process. It's part of labor, and it is used medicinally. So you have a nest. Why do you build a nest? Well, I need a nest in order to make babies, and
Uh,
there were other things found as well. Of course, things that were
so,
local.
so do you
Bird.
think that the big nest was actually like the love shack?
I'm going to let you ask that question of Shane. But what we've talked about, it is fascinating where there are nests in an area, and they seem to be arranged because I got on their butt really really hard, where I was like, you guys have to map this. You have to survey it, even with the compass and tape or something. You have to map it out. Fortunately, they did, but they found a sort of area where there could be a line of sight in this one area, but where they have found other nests, I mean, it is deep and remote, and it is so dang hard to get to, almost as if some of these nests were set up almost as lookouts, as sort of guards,
Yeah,
before any other individual creature, person, intruder could actually get down into the gorge, down into the draw where
Set
there
up
were
kind of
other.
in a defensive posture.
Right, exactly. Yeah, sure, exactly. So that's what little I know about the nest sites. I haven't been there yet, but I was up there. I was up there, the Olympic Project cabin site, when Small Town Monsters came through, and I did a brief interview with them at the time. And Seth Breedlove, who is in charge of Small Town Monsters,
Mm.
he and I have known each other for about 5 or 6 years. And the weekend that we met, Seth and I were like, we should really sit down and talk about Ape Canyon. So people have contacted me through the years, and we need to do a documentary about Ape Canyon. We need to do a documentary, and some have panned out. I did help out a Discovery show once, and um, well, I'm going to say its name. It's Expedition X. I haven't
Hmm.
seen the show, and I don't plan to see the show because it was one of those things where I learned the biggest thing I learned about helping them out was I need to be more choosy about who I work with about
Yeah.
about East Canyon, and so I got a call from a friend who's involved in the Seattle film and TV industry, and we should do a documentary about Ape Canyon. I'm like, wait, okay, wait. So I called Seth and I was like, it's kind of now or never. At the time, we were coming up on the 100th anniversary of the
Hmm.
attack. And Seth was like, let's go. Let's do it. So he pulled the trigger. And so
Perfect.
he put my good friend Eli Watson in
Hmm.
charge
Yep.
of production and direction. And we have been filming off and on in about 4 or 5 different trips. We were up there on the exact minute of the 100th anniversary. We're up at Ape
Were you really?
Canyon. We
How
did
cool.
a lot of great filming up there on the site. We have collected I should say Eli has collected a tremendous collection of interviews with family members who are still alive, other people involved in the research community. And Eli has sent me some rushes. And right now, just the story cut, even without all the recreation and all the other cool pictures and stuff,
Yeah.
it's just shy of 2 hours right now. So it's like
Wow.
I mean, it is really, I'm sorry, Eric, I have helicopters going up with me right now. Um,
Are they black?
yeah, I can't,
Are they
they're
black
in
and
the trees,
unmarked?
Eric. I can't quite see them. Um, um, but from what I've seen, I am thrilled. That's why I wanted to do it with Seth, because Small Town Monsters does such quality
they
work.
they really
And
do.
Seth is the kind of guy, I've filmed with him before, and they're the kind of people who they don't tell you what to say. They'll ask questions. They don't have you, okay, no, take two, take five, let's redo that. They
Right.
just turn on the camera and let you do whatever you want to do, right? And
Yeah.
so from what I've seen, it's being called the Siege of Ape Canyon, and it's going to be released in about 3 or 4 weeks. And you can find out when by checking out Small Town Monsters. But from what I've seen, it's the Ape Canyon story that should be told. It's so much good information. I'm Marc Myrsell, and I approve this message, kind of thing about Ape Canyon. So it's
Running for
dynamite.
governor of Oregon. No, I agree. They are, I think some people kind of accuse them of being a Sasquatch mill, because they do put out a lot of content.
Yeah,
But by and large, most of it, let me say this, all of it is well done.
yeah,
All of it is visually appealing. It's a, even if their episode or their what am I trying to say? Even if one of their documentaries doesn't have any kind of mind-boggling, mind-blowing proof, or it is still a very comfortable thing to watch,
yeah.
because the production and the cinematography is really well done, and it's a very, very relaxing, enjoyable to the eyes.
I think that is actually a very good sign, um, because as a friend said, Bigfoot research is like watching paint dry. or watching grass grow. It can be
That's a good point.
incredibly boring. It can be incredibly
Yeah.
boring. So if some of the small town monsters episodes productions seem rather dull, I think that that is a very good sign because Seth has a background, if I'm right, if I remember right, he has a background in journalism, I believe radio and TV. And I've always had fantasies about being an investigative journalist, but I realize I lack one skill, and that is getting the story and getting it out. Get the story and get it out. And that's one thing that Seth is very good about. It's
Yeah.
amazing on very little money what great quality he has and how he's
Hmm.
able to get the story and bam, get it out. And he's really good at it.
Yeah, it's I don't shy away from any of their releases. When I see something new's coming out, I'm like, all right,
Yeah, I'm
saving
watching
this for
that.
the weekend, saving this for the weekend, because that's something you can put on, and unless they're in the midst of a compelling interview or something, it's something that you can have on almost like a podcast, because the visual part of it is stunning if you want to sit there and watch it, but you can also just pretty much get everything you need to just out of listening to it, and
Sure.
I'll turn them on in the afternoon, and I'll do housework or whatever I'm doing, and have it on going on the same time, and inevitably I always wind up getting a
It,
comfy spot on the seat and on the couch and then watching. But
it is. It's true. There's lots of great information visually. Yeah, it's very stunning. In I believe it was on the trail to Bigfoot, and I think it was the Legend, one of the first ones. And I did an
that was a
interview.
good one. That
I
was a
did
good
an
one.
interview with Seth, and we went up on the mountain and talked about it. And Seth had hired his graphics artist, where it wasn't animated, but it was sort of faux animation in a way,
Hmm.
and it was like a retelling of the Ape Canyon story, and it was really impactful. And I remember watching it once with my mom because my mom had never seen it, and we watched. It was like a 50-minute segment or so on Seth's movie, and I remember after watching it, I was like, I'm not going up there. There's monsters up there, and this is my own project. I've been up there like a cajillion times, but the telling of it was so good, and it was the facts, but it was also visually stunning as well.
Yeah,
They do great
yeah,
work.
they really do. They really do. I was hoping it wasn't this past year, but the year before. I was trying too late, unfortunately, to have a vendor spot there at their conference that they do now in
Yeah.
Ohio. But a lot of good content there. A lot of good content.
Yeah. I'm afraid I don't want to spill the beans, but I understand that you missed out because that was going to be the last Monster Fest. They don't have another Monster Festing planned out, but
Yeah,
yeah,
I noticed that I had not seen anything being advertised for it, but oh well, you win
yeah,
some, you lose some. I had other stuff going on that
sure.
was equally important, so maybe they'll do it again.
I hope so. Yeah.
Anything that is anything that needs to be covered about the Ape Canyon event that we may have bypassed in our rabbit holes?
One thing about well, here's one thing that Ape Canyon taught me, um, and it's true of certainly any Bigfoot research project, any historical research project, honestly, any research project.
Hmm.
No good research project worth its salt is ever done. It's never, ever done. Like I was explaining about how I conduct boundary surveys, and people pay me to draw conclusions, and I do. But in my in my other professional life of Bigfoot, I don't necessarily draw conclusions. I just grab the facts and I lay them down. And the fascinating thing about it is that sometimes in this project, I've gotten to a point where it's like, I have tracked down every dang little tiny lead I can think of. And then suddenly, out of the blue, something new crops up.
Yeah.
An older person shows up and she says, my grandfather knew Fred Beck. And they lead me down. They open up a whole new door for me and provide me with great information. Case in point, which is going to be featured in the Small Town Monster film, on screwing around on Facebook. There's somebody who runs a page of Mount St. Helens before 1980 eruption. It's old pictures of Mount St. Helens. And he had posted this picture of these two Forest Service rangers building a fire lookout in 1924 on Mount St. Helens. Well, I knew exactly who these guys were. And there were the two rangers who had talked with the miners, and these rangers had actually gone up to the cabin site.
Right.
And I got a hold of this Facebook guy. I was like, "Who is this that gave you these photos?" And he put me in contact with an older woman named Sandy, who has become a gem for this project. And I called Sandy, and she was like, "I know exactly what you're talking about. One of those rangers, a guy named Bill Welch, who had first encountered the miners when they came off the mountain, it was her grandfather's brother. And there in the family album that's been sitting there for 100 years is Bill Welch's old photos that he took a week after the attack of the cabin,
Really?
of the miners. And these photos are so crystal clear. At first, being an older guy, at first I thought they were AI, but I sent them to my photographer friends and to my AI young junkies, and they were like,
Yeah.
"No, this is the real deal." And these are so crystal clear. They're beautiful photos of the cabin and the whole area, and they're so dang good. On this last trip on July up there, we were able to go and find each and every single vantage point of these photos 100 years ago. And so
Really?
that was case in point. And Sandy's been a great supporter of this work. She's like, use this photo to tell the story. And so, like I said, no research project is ever really done. And don't think that someday somebody's going to open the door and have nothing for you. Somebody's going to walk through your door and say, Eric, you did really good work on this project, but here's some new evidence that you may not have
Yeah.
found before, and it'll knock you on your butt.
Can we look forward to seeing those photographs in the Small Town Monster project that's coming up?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Eli has
Really?
all of them. Plus, Eli doesn't have all of my file, but a lot of the most juicy parts. So
Yeah.
you can see those photos there to plug somebody else as well. Some of my stuff that I have found, artifacts from the cabin site. I was able to use them legally for outreach and education. And some of them, I found old spoon, baling wire, a broken saw from the miners because we were able to find the foundation of the cabin. Found some of their tools. Some of these are on display at Cliff Barrickman's North American Bigfoot Center out in
Yeah.
Boring, Oregon. There's a great Ape Canyon display there. And also along with Sandy's photographs that you can see there as well.
That's awesome. My daughter and her boyfriend, not this past summer, but the summer before that, they had a whirlwind trip out to the West Coast, and I told her. She said that they were going to Portland, and I said,
So
"Sweetheart," I said, "you're going to be so close. You have to go."
it's 20 minutes away from downtown Portland. Yeah.
And she went, and my God, man, the number of pictures and videos that I got from that girl, she said this was amazing for the low cost to get in,
Oh, yeah.
and the just trove of information and stuff that was in there. She said it was absolutely amazing. So
Absolutely. The good thing about Cliff running that, not only because he's like, oh, superstar Cliff Bergman. I mean, Cliff is one of my best friends in the world, so that's why I'm talking trash about him. But not only is he like a TV star and stuff, he is the real deal. He is a
yeah,
great, great researcher, and because he has a public attraction of this museum, he has been able to get his hands on some amazing pieces of documentation, some amazing artifacts that
yeah,
he wouldn't have been able to if he hadn't he's basically starting a library, and one of the best libraries in the world, honestly, for Bigfoot research. So it is well worth going. His staff, Miko and Tyler and Dave, are so well versed and so well educated and into the subject themselves. Even if Cliff's not around, those guys will take care of you, and it'll be it's a treasure trove of information.
I had the honor of getting to sit down with him, albeit a very brief interview. I think we got maybe 25, maybe 30 minutes at a Bigfoot conference in Michigan about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Really nice guy, a little guarded at first, but once he realized that I was just there to have a conversation, he loosened up pretty quickly, and it was a lot of fun getting to talk to him. I've tried reaching out a couple of times to get him on the show and do an interview, and he's like, "Man, I'm just so busy with doing his own and running the storefront and all that." So maybe someday.
Keep bugging him. Keep bugging him. He'll come around.
Well, Marc, it's been absolutely intriguing talking with you. It's been an absolute pleasure. I love your take on this and your passion for your investigative meanderings through this topic. If we had more time, I would probably first off ask you if you ever came across any information that was legitimate about the Sasquatch sightings and apparent interactions that happened after the Mount St. Helens eruption. So if you give me a nod or a shake of the head, that would be something I'd be happy to revisit with you at another time when you had more time.
Heck yeah, absolutely. Let's do this again. You bet. We could talk about that.
Yeah. Again, sir, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been an absolute pleasure. Great meeting you.
Had a great time with you, Eric. Thanks so much. Let's do it again. Yeah, you bet.
All right, sir. Good night.
Good night. Thanks, man.